Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton agenda AWANI khas dan saya ingin minta izin bicara bahasa Inggeris kerana kita akan membincangkan topik yang amat penting selepas daripada perbincangan tentang kelestarian untuk MDG dan sebagainya. Kini kita ada SDG. That's why I want now to move on into English, and I would like to welcome my very honoured guest for today. And actually, I've been dreaming of what to discuss in this conversation since I've been given the opportunity to have the setting of this particular discussion. So we're going to talk about sustainability, but we're going to approach it from what happened to the MDG, and now we're moving on post 2015. How do we use more and more science and technology, the bare facts of what's happening out there, to give us information feedback, to form action plans and initiatives to make the population of the world living in better environment and sustainably. That's how I see it, but I'm going to let my honoured guests also pitch into the discussion. Nearest to me, of course, Her Excellency Irina Bokova. Thank you so much for making time. You've been the Director General of UNESCO for quite some time, since 2009. And of course, I have with you here with me is Professor Tan Sri Zakri. And Professor Tan Sri Zakri have always been advocating the use of science and technology and innovation. But if I can go back to UNESCO and your role also as chair of the Scientific Advisory Board, now sitting in Kuala Lumpur for the first time, how do we look at what we've achieved so far with the Millennium Development Goals, and what have we learned in terms of making it more inclusive, putting in more science and innovation into it to make the challenges that we are facing palatable to be managed, and in the end to give humanity a better chance of survival?
First of all, thank you for the interest in the meeting of the Scientific Advisory Board with the Secretary General. This is the reason that I'm coming here for a second time in Malaysia, and of course first and foremost my thanks go to the government of Malaysia, to the Prime Minister, to Dr. Zakri, who is the co-chair of this important meeting. And it will not come as a surprise that UNESCO, the United Nations Agency for Education, Sciences, and I emphasize the S in our title, which is to promote science, scientific cooperation, that we are adamant about looking at the development, the sustainable development also from the point of view of what science can contribute to the solutions that we are all seek to find, and moving from the Millennium Development Goals, from the MDGs, which were more kind of a traditional approach towards and very limited, I would say, the 8 Millennium Development Goals. It was more kind of a north-south driven approach. Okay. And now we're moving to a very different, I would say, understanding about what sustainability means, to respond to your question, and what should be the approach of the United Nations. Now, on one side, it's universal, and it is very comprehensive. Already some 17 goals emerge. Yes. They will be adopted, of course, still time to go, but they're embracing some of the aspects which were not previously touched upon. And this is, I believe, where science, technologies, innovation come into the picture, because there is an incredible dynamics in the world. We speak about information revolution. We see every single day that new technologies change the way we communicate, we produce, we consume, and all this tremendous change. And the big question nowadays is, do we sufficiently recognize the contribution of the science, of new technologies to these solutions that we want? Do governments take into consideration, on board, some of these solutions? And I think this is where what we're doing jointly with Malaysia during this meeting of the Scientific Advisory Board is important. There was in 2012 a big conference on sustainability, the Rio Plus 20 conference. And at that time, there was a panel of eminent personalities appointed by the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, that draw a report on sustainability. And there were important their ideas that unfortunately not sufficient interface between science and policy.
Okay.
And that is why the Secretary General called me and said maybe UNESCO should take the lead and set a board, a council of eminent personalities, scientists, to look at this interface between science and policy. And this is why we are here. And I think it is not by chance that we are here in Malaysia, because I know how much Malaysia government and the Prime Minister not only cares, but relies on science, innovation, and new technology to drive the economic development and to should bring about social inclusion.
This meeting will be among the last finalized discussion that will be forwarded to the Secretary General for what will come out to be announced at the end of the year. Do I get that right in that order? Or?
Yes, there are a number of policy papers that members of the board are finalizing, looking at the issues of climate change, but not from the perspective of the science about climate change, but rather as to what kind of recommendations on that basis for policies, for if adaptation is possible or mitigation. The big thing about the data revolution, which emerges as one of the most important for the future sustainable development goals, and also about, I would say, the relations with the main stakeholders, with governments, with the private sector, with the others, and some new ideas about what might be the future goals.
I'll come back to the data revolution, but I'm going to go to Prof. Nasri Zakri here. And you have always been talking not just about STI in sustainable development, but also about bringing science into action. So this is proof that this meeting is happening right now in Kuala Lumpur, is that we are not just participating, but we are actively part of the diversity of the Scientific Advisory Board. If you can please maybe add on to the things that maybe from yesterday and today, maybe tomorrow, that you can move on forward with, especially for Malaysia.
Yes, the Scientific Advisory Board of the Secretary General is the apex panel, really, advising the UN, in particular the Secretary General, on the role of science, technology, and innovation in economic development of any country. And as you said earlier, science may be elitist, but that is only a perception. But really, science is almost omnipresent.
Okay.
For us, just look the plane that we fly in, the road that we drive on, the air that we breathe. All those is about science and technology. And for Malaysia, after 57 years of independence, the role of science and technology has always been there, but it has not been illustrated well. Take, for instance, the case of poverty alleviation, which is one of the goals in the Millennium Development Goals and now in the SDGs. Malaysia has demonstrated that, how we can alleviate poverty, and that is the large land development scheme known as FELDA in this country, which alleviate poverty among the landless through giving them land and also land for planting oil palm. Oil palm is developed through science and technology. It's brought here by the British and now is a plantation crop. But the oil palm itself is the product of science and technology, research, R&D. So the role of science and technology in manufacturing, electronics, electrical activities are all predicated on science and technology. So what I'm saying here, Malaysia has a lot of things going for it on the basis of science and technology. But as the Deputy Prime Minister pointed out in his Hari UNESCO yesterday at Dataran Merdeka, Malaysia is also unique. we place a very important premium on stability, national unity. That, in a sense, also demands science, social sciences. How do we promote national unity? How do we live in a multiracial, multicultural society? And that together illustrate a country which can be emulated by others in trying to build a prosperous nation.
You are still watching a very special session of Agenda AWANI, and I'm on the sideline of the third meeting of United Nations Secretary General Scientific Advisory Board, and two of the biggest names around are here with me. I would like to go to Her Excellency Irina back on the matter of data revolution has been given the term to be included into whatever thinking is behind SDGs. But if we were to look at science to action, then the action must involve, to make the SDGs inclusive, data must be shared across national borders, across private sectors to the public sector, across public sector to civil society, and in between non-governmental organizations on the rest of the world. Now, this is a very, very big task. Even at the national level, it is a challenge. But maybe drawing from your experience of EU and also the UNESCO, give us some silver linings to look at as far as this is concerned.
I think that the question about data really emerges as one of the main challenges, but also opportunities for all countries, for the United Nations, globally, regionally, nationally, in order to first make the right policies, the right policy choices. And it's very much linked to science also, because science provides a lot of these opportunities to share knowledge, as you said, and also to have a very clear picture of actually what is happening when we speak about climate change, when we speak about water management, about health, about education, any single area that is within this sustainable development goals. Now, I think here there is a very interesting and vibrant debate. On one side, there is the big data. Everything that we know, the big data about, as I said, all this. But we need increasingly segregated data. And this is where I think the biggest challenge stays in terms of countries having this segregated data in order to take the right policy decisions. We have to go much deeper into this segregated data. We have to have better statistics. We have to have capacity building in order to have it. We have to bridge the digital divide, because if we don't bridge this digital divide, it will widen, and we don't want this to happen. So there are many, I would say, on different levels, there are challenges that we have to overcome, but without this, we will not progress towards the implementation of the
innovation. Crucial here. For example, for MDGs, one of the critics was, why just base it on household? Because there's a lot of group of people who they're not even there to be quantified as a household. So you'll be marginalizing them out straight from the DNA of the conception of the effort. So for SDGs, in that particular silo of example, how do you move on creatively by not making that same, maybe not being inclusive by just using the matrix of household, to include all the other marginalized communities?
But I think this in fact is the biggest challenge when we speak about this data revolution, and that is why we have to go deep. We have to give this, they call it segregated small data. It is critical. Focus on that. At the same time, we have also traditional knowledge. We should not neglect this traditional knowledge when we speak about data. It adds a lot on some of the policy solutions. We have to have in mind also that, and we increasingly speak about the implementation, the follow-up of the develop sustainable development goals, and how we evaluate it. If we don't have the data, we cannot evaluate. We speak about indicators. We want to be concrete. We want that the global community succeeds into implementing. And without having the indicators which are based on data, we cannot progress.
Tan Sri Zakri, if we look at that, Malaysia's contribution, for example, there must be trust and there must be structured mechanism of sharing the data, because there's a lot of implication, because we are still developing, there's certain sensitive stuff, security aspects and whatnot.
If I could respond to this question by way of an example,
Okay, sure.
how Malaysia managed data. When we had the big flood on the east coast of Malaysia last November, the Prime Minister requested me to examine how science and technology can contribute towards flood recovery, mitigation and adaptation. So I convened a national task force comprising of academia, Director Generals of the respective government departments, from meteorology to drainage and irrigation, the Public Works Department and all. And I was amazed by the amount of knowledge and data that each of these organizations have. But what is surprising, and Madam Irina Bukova also alluded to it, these data were in silos. They are kept in separate organization. In other words, they are not talking together. So what we're doing towards in this issue of data management is to facilitate and coordinate communication among the repository of data in this country. So in a sense, that is the role of science again. In fact, we are proposing to government to establish a scientific advisory panel on disaster and risk management, where big data is really one of the key elements towards solving the problem.
I like to draw something, because we have talked about local wisdom. I like to see the regional local wisdom. For example, Southeast Asia together as a collective realized that all along we've just been talking bureaucrats to bureaucrats, government officials to government officials. Now we want people-to-people communication. So if I look at SDGs, maybe what's wrong with MDGs before, or maybe what's not complete about that is the awareness on ground maybe could have been higher than it was. But for the SDGs, we must have that from the very onset. So how do you share extremely deep but full of width also of discussions like in the SEBs to the layman? Because at the end of the day, civil society must see this as their cause, as their fight too. I have to go for the last break, but once we are back, maybe I'll start with your views and opinions on that particular subject matter. You are still watching a very special session of recorded episode of Agenda AWANI, and I'm very honored and proud, and I'm sure a lot of you guys out there in Malaysia also, for the first time, we have the Scientific Advisory Board to be here in Kuala Lumpur, and I have the Director General of UNESCO beside me. Of course, Professor Tan Sri Zakri will also be there. In this last segment, I'm just going to go straight to it. We worry about a lot of things as a developing nation. We look at science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and technical stuff, and we look at the global ranking, we see we're a bit behind sometimes. But if we put on top of that the bigger, more imperative nature of the SDGs, and that needs a lot more comprehension sometimes in the minds of a lot of people. So can you share your experience of bringing down the highest level of discussion of the Scientific Advisory Board down to the ground, so that civil society and the masses can really participate since the beginning, not just when it's rolled out?
You know, I think that science plays, science, technology, of course, innovation, a hugely important role on all the subjects, starting from fighting poverty and social inclusion, solving some of the pressing problems of climate change, of mitigation. But let me just give you one example, which I think is also very relevant to the region here. It is about science. It is about involving local communities. It is about sharing knowledge, of sharing data, of sharing information. And this is about the tsunami alert system that UNESCO is establishing and has established here in the Indian Ocean after the devastating tsunami and the earthquake, which brought an enormous disaster and human suffering to all the adjacent, but particularly, I would say, here in Southeast Asia. And this is where science comes also into the picture, because we launched in 2011, after long years since 2005, the tsunami alert system in the Indian Ocean. It is on one side the science about seismic tectonics changes. It is about the oceans. It is about sharing data among all the countries around the Indian Ocean. It's about involving local communities. It is about education for climate change, for sustainable development. It is about cooperation among scientists in all the countries. We have 3 scientific centers in Indonesia, in Australia, in India. The 3 of them are monitoring the system 24 hours. And this is about saving lives. This is about saving livelihoods. And this is also, I would say, about coastal populations enjoying a better knowledge about what is at stake. So it is something very concrete. Scientific research, sharing knowledge, involving international cooperation. It's a huge, I would say, operation that is in place, and it is very successful, I would say, example of what we are doing.
For the medium to long term, wouldn't really increasing the quality of education all over the world be a huge support of momentum for the SDGs to be
it's incredibly important. We spoke today, the Scientific Advisory Board spoke today about education and science. There is no science without education. Yes. And just last week, UNESCO organized a global education forum with many of our partners, the World Bank, other development partners. Also, it is important to know what education we need to the 21st century. Science education, including education for sustainable development, link it closely with research, with data, with sharing of knowledge. I think these are really strategic issues that we have to discuss.
Well, Francis Zachary, education has always been our focus, but somehow to get that balance right between science, sustainability, and also what's imperative for national development.
There should not be any compromise on that. But first of all, for a country like Malaysia, we need to improve on our mastery of the STEM subject, namely science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And that would start from very early on in the school. And that includes critical thinking. We need to invest in education in science and technology, but also in the social sciences and humanities, because well, for one thing, critical thinking is part of that. And in the education blueprint, as you are very familiar with, all those elements are incorporated. But give us some time, I think Malaysia would rise to the occasion.
Okay, I would like to give Madam Rina the close for this discussion. And you've been in politics too. Sometimes when we discuss stuff like this under UNESCO, it seems that there's a lot of hope. But when we go to the other side of the UN, Security Council and whatnot, do you see a restructuring of the United Nations itself to fulfill the big and dynamic challenges of the new 21st century?
Well, I think definitely the United Nations are taking a very bold course. There is a lot of debate whether we are too ambitious or we have to lower our ambitions. I think United Nations is doing the right thing. But the United Nations is member states. It is not separate than member states. And that is why I think the example of Malaysia is very inspiring. We have discussed already 2 years ago, I was very impressed by the Malaysia blueprint for education when I suggested to the Deputy Prime Minister, Dr. Yassin, to bring it to UNESCO, because this on the other side inspired many other countries to take the same course, to invest in education, to invest in STEM, to invest in research and development, because this is the only way I believe we can put the dots together between the economic, the social, and the environmental. And this is where also the United Nations are moving, going to September to adopt this ambitious agenda, post-2015 agenda for the future sustainable development goals.
On behalf of all Malaysians, thank you so much for coming here and bringing the SAB with you. Thank you, as usual, Professor Tan Sri Zakri, who I'm sure played a very big role in making that happen. Thanks to you for watching and listening. STEM, remember, but apart from that, sustainability, we don't want to use up today what the next generation wouldn't have to be able to survive. So that's the big task for us and for humanity. Anda boleh hantarkan pandangan anda sendiri kepada pelbagai platform yang Isra Awani ada dan terus menyaksikan agenda Awani dalam episod yang lain pula. Sekian, selamat malam dan terima kasih. Thank you so much.
Terima kasih.
Very honored.
Thank you very much.